By now you've seen that you can build pretty much anything in Flutter. The last section we saw how the Google team had actually built charts, and they're pretty amazing. All they've done really though is build some custom widgets. So that's what we're going to do in this section, is build some custom widgets. We're going to start very simple. Let's go ahead and let's expand out our lib, and let's make a new Dart file. Let's call this my widget. In my widget, we've got a little bit of work we need to do here. So let's go ahead and import the package, and we want the Flutter material. That way we have all the material design widgets that we need. And we're going to extend the stateless widget. Stateless widget just means that we're not going to hold a state within this widget. And we want to implement the build function, which is just going to return a widget. Remember, anytime you see the word build, think render. We're going to render something out to the screen. Return new container. And in our container here, we are going to, you guessed it, add in some padding. And then we're just going to make a new text. So what exactly is going on here? Well, we've got a class. It's a stateless widget, so it's not holding state. That's right. Each individual widget has its own slice of the state, meaning each widget has its own little boundary in memory called state. This one, however, doesn't care about state because we're trying to keep this example very simple, but just understand that concept that each individual widget can have its own state. Now, what we're doing is we're calling the build function. I should say the build function is called automatically. And we're going to have a context in here. We're returning a container and just simply printing out hello world. So let's go and go into here. Let's import the my widget. Because it's in the same directory, we don't really need to do anything special. And let's go ahead and put it in here. Hot reload, and you can see hello world. So what exactly is going on here? Let's break this down a little bit. When the application loads, we have our import, so it automatically knows we need this widget. Then we have our stateful and our state. In our state, we have going out, we're rendering. Here's the build function right here. Nothing new. However, when it gets to here, it's saying new my widget. It's then going out here and calling build, which is how it's rendering out onto the screen. If this was a stateful widget, it would have its own state, and you would have your own internal variables you would have to manage. We're going to go ahead and expand on our previous tutorial and make an actual stateful widget. First thing we want to do though is we want to actually import the internationalization package out of pub.dartlang. Do that, you just grab the install code, there we go, and we're going to go out here and go to our pubspec YAML. We're installing this because we want to do some date formatting, and we want to make sure it's correct. Let's get our packages git and make sure that that doesn't have any problems. There we go. Now we're going to just create a new Dart file, and let's call this clock. We can actually just use most of our live template here. And let's call this clock state. There we go, just saved ourselves a lot of typing. Let's get this guy here. And let's do this, just so we can see what's going on in the background. Now we've got our stateful widget, we've got our state for the stateful widget. We need to go ahead and flesh these out a little bit. Because this is a clock, you can kind of guess what we're going to do. We're going to actually build a clock. So let's say string value, and let's say time here. Ooh, we forgot a few imports. Let's go ahead and add those. I'm going to import the async class. Let's go ahead and import the internationalization class, or I should say package. There we go. Timer, and we're going to call this timer. We're going to add our init state, and in the init state, we're going to make a new timer here. We're going to say timer periodic, and we want a duration of 1 second. And we need a callback for this. Our callback is going to be called onTimer. Let's add our callback in there. So whenever this timer ticks in the background in memory, it's going to call this callback, and then we're going to actually just format this out. Sometimes I get a little lazy and I just say var instead of actually typing out the type. There we go. And, whoops, I don't want that. Yeah, I do actually want that. I want date format. Sorry about that. So we want our date format, and let's go ahead and do hour, whoops. So we want hours, minutes, seconds. And let's go ahead and do string formatted. And we want the formatter format. So that's going to take the actual time and put it in the correct format based on your internationalization. And let's go ahead and set state. And we're going to set our value to the formatted value. Now that we've got all this, we've got our timer in memory, and it's going to set the state on that value right here. We need to actually go ahead and, you guessed it, put this out here. So let's say return a new text, and we're going to just render this out on the screen. There's our value, and let's make this nice and big and bold here. Style, we'll say new text style. Font size, let's call this 32.0. And flip over to our main. Now we're going to just import this clock. And add this in here. Add our clock. And as you can see, hot reloading has picked it up. And you can see the seconds are counting down, and it will flip over if we stay here long enough over to the minutes. And it's in the correct internationalization. That is a good example of a stateful widget. That widget has its own state, which we're not accessing from the parent. Although you can actually share stateful information between widgets, which we'll cover in the next section. Now we're going to increase the complexity even more. We're going to put a widget in a widget and then have them talk to each other. So let's expand this out. And let's make a new Dart file. Let's call this time display. The time display widget here is just simply going to, well, display a duration. So let's go material. So we have the material package in there. Good. And then we'll say class time display. I actually want to make that. There we go. And we want this to be stateless, because we really don't care what's going on in the outside world. We just want to display some information. Duration, let's call this duration. color, let's say color, and initially let's call this colors.green. Let's add a final, and let's make this a value change. This might be a little bit new. What we're doing here is we're saying this is a value that's going to be set somewhere else. And it is templated, so we're going to set a duration. Notice how we're not setting that, and it's saying final variable must be initialized. Let's go ahead and fix that right here in the constructor. Whoops. There we go. And we're just going to add in the supers key here. There we go. Notice how we're also missing a concrete implementation of statelessWidget.build. Let's go ahead and fix that. Control-O, build. There we go. Now we just need to flesh that out. What we also need to do here is let's make it on-clicked, because we're going to have a little icon button and we want to be able to clear things out. So what exactly is going on here is we have a duration, we have a color, and then we have a value changed, which is templated saying duration. Value change denotes that this is going to change something. Some value, which is going to be a duration, is going to change. Because we have no implementation, we're saying it's being called somewhere else. It's part of the constructor. We have to pass that. Remember, in Dart, even a function can be a variable. So we're passing a function here. On-clicked, we're going to have a button down here somewhere, is also going to call this onClear. So whatever function we hand this widget is also going to be called down in the actual display of it. So we're going to say return new row. We want main axis alignment, and let's say main axis alignment center, because we want to center everything on the screen. Children, and let's go ahead and add some children in here. So we want the padding to be edge inset all. And let's add this as a 5. We don't want to pad it too much. It might look a little ridiculous if we did. And then let's go ahead and add this as a child here. And in here we're going to say new text. And let's say, we want the durations.toString. And let's give it a style here as well. Just doing a little bit of styling, making it look nice. We're going to say font size equals 32.0, color, and let's say this is going to actually just be the color that we handed it. So we're just going to use that color up here. Initially it's green, but of course we're going to hand it a color in the constructor itself. And we want a new icon button down here. And for the icon, let's say new icon. Got a little ahead of myself there. Icons dot. And let's add the clear icon. And for pressed, we'll say on clicked. So that is our stateless widget right there. We're going to go ahead and we're going to make a stateful widget next. Our stateful widget is going to be a little bit of typing here, so bear with me. We're going to say new, and we want this to be a time counter. And the time counter is going to actually use the display. And for the sake of time here, I'm just going to copy and paste some imports. And actually, you know what? I'm just going to go. We're going to reuse that. Get rid of these. There we go. Save me a little bit of time. And let's say we want the time counter state, which is going to be the state of the time counter. There we go. All right. Just going to return null for the moment. We've seen this design pattern before. We just got stateful widget, and then we have a state. In the state, this is where things are going to get a little bit interesting. We want a stopwatch, and we're going to call this watch. Want a timer. And we want a duration. If you haven't guessed, we're actually building a stopwatch. So there we go. Let's grab that. And we're just going to make a couple functions here. We're going to say on start, on stop. Let's make this start, not started. There we go. And because we have a timer, we're going to also do an on timeout. So we've got our timer, we've got a stopwatch, we're going to start, stop, we've got a timeout, and let's also do an on clear. Doing an init state. And we want our duration in there. There we go. Pretty simple, pretty easy. Now, let's go ahead and let's build this out a little bit here. We have got absolutely nothing. We've got absolutely nothing in here. Let's start from scratch then. Container. We want edge insets all. Let's say 10.0. Probably help if we actually returned. There we go. And then for a child, we want a new center. Well, let's put a column in here. And then in our column, we want a list of widgets, and we're going to make a new time display. Notice how we have some properties we can fill out. For example, color. We're going to say colors.red. And duration. We're going to use our state's duration. And then the onClear function. Notice how that wants a duration also. On clear. And because those parameters match up, we don't have to do an anonymous function. Now let's add a new row. And in our little list of widgets here, let me actually back out here. I want to make sure this has got the main axis alignment in there. Main axis alignment center, otherwise it's going to look a little goofy. There we go. Now we're going to add a new padding. And for the padding, let's go ahead and say new edge insets all. I'll break this down just a hair. There we go. This is unfortunately kind of the boring part of programming, is just watching me type and type and type. So let's add a new raise button. And on pressed, we're going to just say on start. Now what we can do is we can just take this little guy and actually copy and paste him. So we've got our start, our stop, and now we can flesh out these individual functions and get this thing actually working. So let's look at our start. Whoops, where did that go? There we go. Looks a little better now. So in start, we want to set our watch. Set our timer. We want that to be a timer periodic. And we want this to run in milliseconds. We want this to be every 250 milliseconds. You can make it faster if you want, but you are going to start probably getting into some speed issues on some of the older phones. So we want the on time out. There we go. So that is our start function in all of its glory. Let's go ahead and start that watch. Then let's go ahead and do our stop. We're going to say timer.cancel because we want to just cancel that out. We want to stop our watch. Now the timeout. This is where the magic really happens here. If the watch is not running, we just want to exit out of here. Otherwise, we want to set the state here. And in our little set state, we are just going to say the duration equals the watch.elapsed time. Now on clear, because this is the function that we're handing off to our timer display, we need to actually do something here. In this case, we're just going to clear out that duration. Pretty complex little bit of code. We're going to jump over into our main here. And let's import our timer counter. Time counter, not timer counter. Ooh, I did misspell that, didn't I? There we go. Let's actually, can I actually rename this? Let's try it this way, although I think it's going to complain. There we go. All right, I'm going to say my stopwatch. Usually I do lowercase, that's why I was wondering if it was going to complain on me. And it may. We may have to actually go in and change that around. Wow, all sorts of mistakes in this one. There we go. And let's say new timer counter. Save that. And let's actually rerun the whole thing. And here is our stopwatch in all of its glory. You can see it's going, 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 going. If we hit stop, we did 4.75 seconds. We can actually clear that out. Start it again. And that was 5 seconds, almost 5 seconds even. And if we start it without clearing it, you see how it just clears it out for us. So that's a good example of how to do a widget within a widget and still have them talk to each other. And let's look at the code super quick. We have our timer display, and that's the part that actually just displays this widget here. Notice how we also have this icon button with the on press, which is the on clicked. That's that little X right here. If we click that, it clears it out. It's getting that from our timer counter code right here, new timer display, and we're saying on clear, and we're passing a function as a variable. And we're saying red and then with the actual duration. And then we just have some buttons that control the start and stopping of this thing. Now that we know how to get information to a child widget, let's see how to get information back from a child widget. What we're going to do is we're going to make an authenticator widget. It's going to have a username, a password, and a button. When we click the button, it'll check to see if the user's authenticated based off the username and password that they gave. Here we have our main.dart file with our entry point to our application. We don't have a widget yet. Let's go ahead and build the code in our state, and then we'll build a widget. We're going to say bool is authenticated. Now we want a function. This function is going to be our callback. And let's go ahead and set the state here. There we go. And let's go ahead and initialize our state. Now, we need these parts first simply because our widget is going to use them. We're going to create a widget and use this function as the callback. Let's go ahead and let's build that out now. Create a new Dart file. Call it authenticator. And let's use our live template here. Save us a bit of typing. There we go. And let's take this right here and let's just return null. We're going to change all that here in a minute, but right now we just want to return null, get all that stuff out of there so we can focus on what we need to work on. All right, we have a stateful widget and we have a state. Nothing special here. What we need to do now is actually build out the widget state and return that information back out to the parent. Let's see how this works. In our actual stateful widget, we're going to add a value here. Let's call this final, and it's a value changed. And the value changed is going to be a boolean. And let's call this unauthenticated. Notice how the ID is complaining because, well, this has not been initialized yet. So let's go ahead and fix that problem. We're going to make a constructor here. And we're going to say this dot unauthenticated. Notice how we still have not initialized this. What we're doing is we're going to use that as a callback here in the main Dart file. So what this code is basically saying, don't worry Dart, we're going to initialize it somewhere else. It's going to be a callback. That's a little bit different because what we've normally done with stateful widget is we've just called the create state and we haven't done anything else. But because we cannot access the state of this widget outside of the widget, we need to be able to pass information back and forth. Let's go ahead and modify our state now. We're going to make a text editing controller and let's call this user. Whoops. Text editing controller, let's call this password. And let's make another value changed. Let's make this also a bool. We're going to call this unauthenticated. Once again, it needs to be initialized, so we're going to use a constructor. And this is also saying the same thing. Don't worry, Dart, we're not going to initialize it here. We're going to initialize it somewhere else. But because now it's part of the constructor, we can pass it over here. There we go. Essentially what we're saying is use our constructor as a callback, and then use this here in this constructor as a callback. So we're just passing it right through. Now we know we're going to have a button, so let's go ahead and make our onClick. And let's go ahead and do some authentication here. Probably the strongest password on the planet here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say not authenticated. And if the username is user and the password is 1234, then we're going to say the unauthenticated is true. Let's go ahead and save that. It did a hot reload without any issues, so we know that it is working as expected here. Let's go ahead and let's change this around. Whoops, wrong spot there. We're going to initialize the state. And in our state, we want to, of course, build our text editing controllers. Now, we need to actually go out and build the user interface for this. This particular widget is just going to have the 2 text fields and a button. So let's go ahead and use a new card. And in the card, we're going to add a padding. And for the padding, let's say new edge insets all. We just want to pad this out a little bit, make it look kind of pleasing to the eye. And our child for this, let's make a new column. Column, of course, takes children. And in here, we're going to say new text field. And let's go ahead and take that down, say controller. And we're going to do the username. And for decoration, because we want the user to be able to realize what's going on here, let's say a new input decoration. And let's do a label text of username. Should be pretty self-explanatory what we're asking the user to do here. Let's grab this. And through the magic of copy and paste, we can do the password. Now, because this is a password, we also want to obscure the text. That way, if someone's on an elevator standing behind you or whatever, they don't see your password there. And let's just pad this out a little bit here. We're going to add a raise button. Let's change this to on pressed. That way it's pretty obvious what's going on there. All right, so we've got our username, password, and our button. When we press the button, it's going to call this onPress, which is going to do some pseudocode that would mimic some sort of authentication in the background. In a production application, you would be going out to like a server or Firebase or something like that, and you would be doing some sort of authentication. Here, because this is just a simple example, we're just going to do user and 1234. Never, ever, ever do that in a production system. I will find you, I will come to your home, and I will lecture you on strong passwords. All right, so now that we've got this, let's go ahead and add this in here. So we've got our authenticator in there. Let's add our authenticator, and notice how we want to do the unauthenticated. Let's set this to unauthenticated, which is actually right here. So that's the callback. We're doing this in the parent in main Dart. So all of that code that goes through the child, even though the child has its own state, is actually running right in the parent, right here. And then we can actually set this. Wow, could not spell that. And then we've got the is authenticated. Let's go ahead and restart this whole thing. We've done a lot of changes. And you can see we have our username. Let's type in user. And let's type in a password of just some random garbage. And authenticated false. Let's go ahead and delete this. Put in our top secret password 1234. And you can see now authenticated is true. So that is an example of using callbacks and having the child push information up to the parent.